Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a hardpoint setup guide where we're going to be running through P1, 2, 3 and 4 on Skyline Hardpoint and saying how to best hold the hills, what setups you can have, and it's perfect for a 4-man, but it actually also helps you as a solo duo or even a trio queuer because it will hopefully help you understand what sort of areas you need to hold and when, and know how to fill the gaps and where you can fill the gaps from. So we're going to be kicking straight into it, not going to be any sort of long intro, and this is P1 on Skyline. So just for reference, so you know where we're at, P1 is here, the kitchen is here, P2 is on the left where they've got that little helipad, and then the little fire pit is here on the right. So that's just where that's the top-down perspective we're looking at. What we can see here is a setup from the red team. Now the red team this is the setup you're going to want to have in an ideal situation because P2 is on this left-hand side just here. What we can see we've got a player in kitchen, a player top cat, a player on P1, and a player back piano. Now, player back piano, there's got a green ring around them, and the reason they've got a green ring around them is because they are blocking the back spawn here. So these players here are able to push up to this point and maybe a slightly bit further, but I wouldn't risk it because this player is back piano, essentially blocking this back spawn back here. In this position, the blue team, i.e. the enemy team, when you're playing this, will be spawning at the fire pit, which means they're going to be coming from the bad side, which means they're going to be pretty much funneling into a handful of areas. Now, how does this look in practice? So where is everyone watching here? So first of all, we're going to be focusing on the player who's blocking. So the player blocking only really has one line of sight from this direction, and it is into the bottom of the bedroom. Essentially, they're going to be watching over the player on the hill. They're going to be looking into the bottom bedroom, as we can see here. Player on the hill is literally just watching the top catwalk. So they're staying down. They're trying to be as safe as possible, trying to ensure that they're not dying. They've got a trophy next to them, and they're basically playing their life. They're not really over peaking because they don't need to with this setup we've got here. But what they can do whilst they are laying down on the hill is just look at top cat, because they can assist player who is top cat in just making sure they're at least weak by the time they get to them. But essentially their job is to stay down here, and you could have them with a sub, would be probably the best gun to have them with. Piano obviously would have an AR. We then have the player top catwalk, who is holding a real tight angle, as you can see, and they're pretty much watching the top of bedroom, essentially ensuring that people can't over peak from the rooftop. And they're holding a real nice little tight angle there, make sure they can't do that. Again, would have an AR. Finally, we've got a real important player here, who's playing number 7, who's sat in kitchen, and from kitchen they're pretty much watching the art door, which is where you've got the guitars and those sort of things, and they're also flicking between that and the orange line here, which is like a secondary pickup, which is essentially the long line of sight here. Now realistically, you only need to check the long line of sight every few seconds or so, because it's going to take an enemy 4 or 5 seconds to get from this line of sight to you. So as long as you're checking it every 4 or 5 seconds from this position, you're absolutely fine. Okay, now these aren't rigid. This video isn't meant to be like, do you need to be in these exact positions for it to work? That's not the case. You just need to make sure what's similar here is you have one person blocking, and then all the other lanes are being held, and this is just an idea of how you can hold those lanes and where, an idea of where you can hold them from. Now, on Skyline, it's pretty easy because the map's relatively open. The only thing you've got to be careful of is the underground route, but the person on the piano can always pick up that underground route if they need to, because they're relatively close to it. So if you're noticing that there's a few enemies, we've seen the same 3 people die again, we're looking for one more player and we're not sure where they are, and you get the feeling you're missing someone, the player from piano can decide to just check the hop up, as we can see here. Now, if the pressure from the front of the hill, directly front of the hill, gets too much for the players who are overlooking, so let's say players, whose piano's getting overwhelmed, there's a lot of players pushing it, players coming from top quite frequently, the player actually on a hill can have an alternative line of sight from the hill itself. There's a nice little header you can see, which looks into bottom bedrooms. They can support from that angle. The player then from kitchen can get a little bit more involved. So you can see they're pushed up from the table all the way to this little U-bend here, and then from here they can watch the exit to art, but also, again, every 4 or 5 seconds or so, watch the long push through this long line of sight here, make sure they can't pinch kitchen. And it's pretty much that simple, to be fair. Now, let's take the approach of the other side. So you're probably wondering, why would you want the other side? Now, if you're in a situation where you can win on P1, okay, you need a few seconds to win. You don't really want to flip. You want to be focusing on this time. And there are certain situations, it's very, as I say, situational. There are situations where you just want to get the P1 time. You don't necessarily want to flip. You just want to make the most out of the hill time you've got. And this is a real nice setup you can have. Again, this isn't super strict. As long as you have one person blocking and players sort of in this position watching every route, you're going to be pretty much fine. So we have a player who's pretty much doing the same thing as the other guy was on P1, and they're basically just laying down on hill, playing their life, watching top cat. You then got a player bottom art under the catwalk, watching the push out of piano. A player above them, pretty much on the top of the catwalk, holding a really nice line of sight you can see here to the top of piano stairs. Finally, we've got that player in kitchen who's making sure they can't get through kitchen. And as long as these players stay in this sort of row and they don't push over like a halfway line, if you imagine a line that cuts the map down the middle, and this is the same on the other setups as well, as long as you don't have anyone pushes through that, your chances of flipping are very slim, okay, which is what you want. So yeah, that's just an idea for this particular hill. Moving on to P2 here, you can see we're going to assume this side is, because you don't really want to hold it from the other side, to be fair. So who do we have? Who do we have and what are they doing? So you've got a player P1, player piano steps, player sound time, and a player in kitchen. Now, again, you can see here, most of the lanes are covered. You've got a player blocking, who is the player in P2, and importantly, they need to be at the back of P2 for this to work, because otherwise these two have a threat of spawning the enemy behind you, which is not what you want. So this player has to sit as deep into the P2 hill as possible. And yeah, what are they holding? And again, you can see that it's a similar setup. You've got a person blocking and people holding lanes. It's fairly self-explanatory. But again, these are just ideas of where you can hold the lanes from. So the person in the hill doesn't only just need to be getting the hill and blocking, which is what they're doing. They can also make sure that they're looking at the elevator lift shaft, hop up, zip, whatever you want to call it. And they can do that from being in the hill, okay? It's a little bit of an animation. So as long as they're sitting there watching it like this, it's going to be fairly easy to hold. And you then got a player piano steps watching the push over the catwalk. You've then got a player P1 who is looking at the push from bottom bedroom area. And then finally, you've got a player in kitchen watching the kitchen push. Now, again, as long as you don't really push past this halfway line in P2, player in P2 is sat far back enough in the hill, the enemy team are going to be spawning fire pit, which means they're going to be funneling into every single one of these line of sights here with ease. I see a lot of players make the mistake of when they get fall down on P2, they just sit around the hill, but you can push up this far as long as you've got someone actively trying to block here like this player is. And realistically, it means you're taking the gunfights to them, which is what you want to be doing on Hardpoint. Now, some alternative line of sights could happen here. So let's say, again, you feel like you're missing one and you're not sure where they are. The only fault in the original setup, if I just go back, the only fault in this original setup is they could go up the zip, but only halfway. So they jump out in the lounge like the piano floor rather than going all the way up. In that case, you know, it would be catastrophic because there's no one watching that. You can have this like alternative position in here where the player could be sat on piano. So you've still got the player P2 sat in the back of the hill watching the top zip line. So they're not really doing anything different. The other three have sort of changed where they're watching. So the player who was piano steps is on piano and they're watching the bottom bedroom push, as well as the first floor of the lift or the elevator. And you've then got a player on P1 who's sort of staying down watching the catwalk push, again similar to what you'd have someone do on P1. And then finally you've got the player who's in kitchen who's watching sort of the middle area, the push out of bedroom, from the low end as well as the kitchen push, okay? But again, it's all about making sure the maps are covered, you bring the gunfights to them, and you have someone blocking enough so that they don't spawn in behind you. Moving on to P3. Now, this is a real interesting hold. It can be held from both sides. We're going to assume we've got the good side, and I'm going to call this good side because P4 is here, so you're going to want this right hand side of the map controlled in order to get the best spawns for P4. Now, this isn't a spawn guide. I'm not going into massive details in spawns, but obviously knowing the spawns and being conscious of where how you impact the spawns in these setups is essential into knowing why these work. But if you want spawn guides, again, you can check them out in the previous uploads to the channel. So we've got the blue team here. They're currently on P3. You've got a very, very important player here, player number 1. They are sat back here, and you probably, and their main purpose and pretty much their only purpose is to block. Okay, whilst this player is here, the red team will not be able to spawn over this side. Okay, this player needs to stay alive in order for this setup to work. So they're a really important player, although they're not quite in the action. So they're playing a massive part of this objective, even though they're not directly on it and maybe not getting many kills. But whilst they're back here, they can be watching the bookcase push, which is an easy flank route for the red team to take. So at least that's accounted for. But they're blocking, okay? You then have a player who's also impacting spawns, and it's this player up here. Now, they're pushed slightly through kitchen, which only works and only keeps them spawn in this left-hand side because this player is here, okay? So you do, if you want this player to push through kitchen here, this player needs to be playing their life back here, okay? But what this player does by pushing out kitchen is they block this close kitchen spawn and instead spawn the red team all the way back to the tree, meaning they've got the furthest route possible to P3 and, importantly, P4. So, whilst they're in this position, the enemies are going to be spawning all the way over here. And what are they watching while they're in this position? So, the player who's pushed up through the kitchen is just going to be trying to play their life because essentially this player here is making the spawn all the way in nano. But whilst they're here, they can sort of watch the cross, watch the push. Through piano, they can communicate how many you've pushed through. They can see if they're missing one, then perhaps they've gone round and tried to take a route towards the front of the kitchen. But they're the info grabber, okay? They're the person who's laying down, getting the info and trying to make sure they can account for everyone crossing. And as again, if they only see 3 or 2 people cross, they can go, okay, where are the other players? Maybe I need to check my left. And it's probably where you pick up players who's trying to kill from the front of the hill. You then have the player in the hill itself who's sat on the furnace, who's watching the whole cut across the bottom of the map, the main floor of the map across the swimming pool. You then have a player top cat watching the top piano steps push, and then again, finally, you have the player who's back in the spawn watching the bookcase flank. Now, from here, every single area of the map is covered, and you're spawning them in the furthest possible spawn point because you've got one person blocking and one person pushed slightly through the current objective. So this is a real nice setup you can have on P3. Now let's flip this on its head, okay? Let's say you, for whatever reason, similar to P1, it's a complete situation, but say you can win on P3 here, for example, and you want to try and get the most out of this hill as much as you can. This is also a solid setup from this side. You've got a player sat on hill, a player back barbecue, a player piano steps, and a player P1. Now the player back piano steps and barbecue are the ones blocking, making sure the enemies can't flip. So they need to be here if you want to keep these spawns and you want to keep it an easy read on where the enemies are going to be coming from, okay? Don't forget, not flipping is only good if you don't want to flip, obviously, but also if you want to control where the enemies are spawning and guarantee you can read them better. If you know what spawn points the enemies are blocking, where you're blocking and where the enemies are spawning, you know where you need to be watching. So, where are they watching whilst being in these positions? So, the player back barbecue, whilst blocking spawns, are also watching the right-hand side of the hills and protecting the back of player 5 here, who's sat soaking up the hill time. The player soaking up the hill time is watching their close U cut. They can see anyone who's decided to run down long and push the right-hand side here. They're seeing anyone push through bottom art. So they're not just sat on the hill staying down, they're getting killed as well. But this player here is really important that they just, they do catch anyone pinching, essentially, or going around the right-hand side of this island. Because otherwise this player's going to get shot in the back and they're going to be pretty angry. And the player top piano, again, as well as blocking, is watching top cat and top bedroom. And then finally, the player P1 is watching the push out of art with this player on hill. So both of these players are going to have a line of sight into the bottom art. And then the player P1 as well is also watching bottom bed. And whilst they're in this position, the enemy's going to be spawning fire pit, meaning they're likely to run bottom bed, top bed, and probably up the stairs and maybe the front of the hill. But you can see here, everything's pretty much covered apart from the flank underground. But if something were to happen where someone flanked underground and either killed 7 or 6, one of these two blockers, hopefully it's an easy trade because you've got a line of sight to where they could be killed from, okay? If they hop over the elevator and kill player 6, player 7 can back up and get the trade instantly. Similarly, if the people come up the elevator and kill player 7, hopefully the player P1 or the player in barbecue can trade that quite simply as well. Moving on to P4, now you very much want to spawn this side of the map, okay? This is the side of the map you want to be spawning because it's very close to P4, and as you can see, you can spawn the enemies all the way out over here. So why are the enemies spawning out here? First of all, you've got a player sat in the hill. The player sat on the hill is blocking. Okay, so they're not only getting hill time, but they're sat at the back of the hill actively blocking. They're being close to this backside here. They're not sat in the bathtub. They're not sat in the shower. They're not sat in the corners. They're sat at the very back of the hill, laying down, essentially making sure they can't come through the bookcase. Okay, they're playing a little bit of an off angle here, as well as blocking. So this player's positioning is really important so they don't flip. They're acting as the blocker in this situation. You've then got a player top bed watching the catwalk push and essentially making sure they can't come top piano steps. But also importantly, this player here, player number 4, is pushed this right hand side of the kitchen enough so that the enemy don't spawn here. Okay, so this player number 4 and this player number 2 are the 2 blockers we have for P4, stopping the enemies from spawning back here. Now, what's causing the enemy to spawn all the way over here rather than here is these 2 players, essentially. These 2 players here have just the same amount of impact in that having the enemy spawn all the way over here. Okay, so you need players pushed up into kitchen to spawn the enemy back piano, which makes the route to the hill from this team hell at the end of the day. It's a real nightmare. So where's everyone holding while being in these positions? Because obviously being in these positions is one thing, but being able to kill enemies from these positions is another. So, as I say, player number 2, I haven't drawn an arrow for some reason, but player number 2 is sat basically watching the bookcase push, and that's pretty much all they need to watch. Okay, because their main point here is getting hill time and holding the spawn. Player number 1, as I say, top cat, and they're watching the push through top piano. Because realistically, they're coming off a tree. They're either going to run bottom piano, they're going to run top piano, maybe come catwalk, but that's what that player number 1 is holding the catwalk. Okay, it's their job to make sure they can't come from top. You then have player number 4, who is sat on the island heady here, and they're basically making sure that the enemy can't just push through outside piano with ease. All right. And then player number 3 is pretty much doing the exact same thing. You'll often find the team spawning here are likely just to run to P1 over and over again, which is why I've got 2 people focused in this area. On the weird occasion, they do decide to wrap all the way around and kill this player here. At least you've got a backup in player 4 to get the trade and continue this strong hold. And that's it. That's pretty much the end of the video. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. I hope you found this useful. If you did like this sort of setup, make sure you show the love, because it will make me want to prioritize this over something else. And yeah, let me know what map you want to see next, if this is something you want to see more of. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.